So hello everybody, this is Bante Joe here, and I'm just here at a village kuti in Gampaha and thought to record a short awada for the internet. So I thought that could start with just a little meditation, so can lean forward a bit and arch the spine and look about 3 feet in front and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in and know when it's going out. If we breathe in a long breath, you can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if we breathe in a short breath, you can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can try to make one's mind a bit like a post in the sea. And the waves come up over the post and go back down into the sea. But the post remains where it is. So in a similar way, one can just make the mind still, observing the breath. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill, wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond. In every dimension, may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And can open our eyes and do a short Dhamma discussion for the internet. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So hope that everybody's keeping well wherever might be. And just here at village Kuti in Gampa, and the Vasa continues. And so about a month or two ago, maybe 2 months ago now, was talking with a group, and one of the fellows from the group was asking about the 8 worldly winds. And he said, does the 8 worldly winds, does that mean that, is that teaching basically more or less meant to point to that one should try to always be in some kind of balance between like gain and loss, or pleasure and pain, or praise and blame, and fame and loss of fame, fame and anonymity? Should one try to like balance these and kind of like surf them to like ride the waves of life? So that was the question. I guess the question more or less was that, is that what that teaching is about? So basically, it is important in one's practice to be able to balance competing forces. As kind of, Buddhism is actually not the only religion that notices this, or this is not the only religion and where this practice is something that's necessary. Actually, Taoism, that's the kind of main focus of Taoism, is kind of balancing these like competing forces and like riding the waves of life. And actually, quite frequently, when one is engaging in whatever activity it is, one may have these principles that are there, and one may not know how to balance between competing principles. And it's kind of, I was just giving this Owada last week about how good and bad often come mixed together, and it's in these situations that one really has to try to balance principles. It's kind of, if you say like you have a friend, and maybe that friend saved your life in the past, but they don't keep sila. They're kind of very immoral people, but they saved your life. So how should one behave towards them? How should one balance this out? How should one balance these competing principles to try to find what's right in line with the Dhamma? And it's kind of, in terms of one's gain and loss and pleasure and pain and these various things, actually pleasure and pain is maybe one of the ones where this will most frequently come up in a person's life. It's kind of, oftentimes one will have to say forsake a lesser pleasure for a greater one. But in getting rid of that lesser pleasure, one has to do it wisely. And one has to kind of renounce it wisely so that one can do it. It's actually a lot of the way that one practices follows this kind of principle. One kind of gradually replaces coarser habits with more refined ones, gradually replaces coarser feelings of happiness with more refined ones, and then when one replaces it with a more refined one, then one lets it go. It's kind of, so one may start doing all kinds of partying and these various things, and immediately one stops drinking. One can stop the habits that are explicitly against the precepts. And then one might still then go to these parties and think, but at least one isn't drunk. One has to learn to take pleasure in something else. Like maybe one is a much better dancer now. Kind of the classic one is that that one should learn to find pleasure in meditation. One should try to learn to find pleasure in concentration so that one can relinquish the things of the world. And in this way, there's this kind of like balancing between these things, between especially pleasure and pain. And kind of praise and blame is another one. All these things have the kind of balance to them. If one is teaching, one has to balance the amount of praise, the amount of blame that one gives. If one is receiving blame, and kind of and it's too much. One may want to think back on times when one was praised. And one has to evaluate, is the blame correct? Is the situation correct? So there is always these aspects of balance. However, the Buddha's teaching on the 8 worldly winds is actually something much more radical. It's basically, when one reads the sutta is called the Loka Vipatti Sutta. It's the failings of the world, basically. And it's that these things are always spinning around each other. There's no escaping gain, or there's no escaping loss if one looks for gain. Gain and loss are both tied together, and both of them are impermanent. They don't last, they're inconstant. So what it means is, if that one of these things comes up, then the other one will eventually come. And it's very interesting in the way that the Buddha teaches about the kamma of giving, for example. It's when a person is or the kamma of wealth. It's when a person is open-handed and generous that's the kamma that leads to being wealthy. And talking with a bunch of people, if one has ever done like a charity work or whatever it might be, it's interesting. Often the people who are poorest, not always, but often the people who are poorest are much more generous, are much more freely giving. And one of the reasons for this is that if people who are very wealthy, a lot of people approach them and ask for stuff, and so they would have to give all their stuff away before too long. Another reason is that when people are wealthy, they take on lifestyle habits that can be very expensive. And also, when people can be quite wealthy, they can rely more on their money, and they have to rely less on their relationships with other people. So just comically, it becomes easier for a person who is poor to be generous. And it becomes easier for a wealthy person to become stingy. It doesn't necessarily have to be this way in either case. But what it means is that these things spin around each other comically. And one kind of is poor, one gives more, one becomes wealthy. It becomes harder to give, or conditions are just such that they push one's mind away from giving, and one becomes poor comically as a result. These conditions spin after each other. Now, because they spin after each other like this, it's not really possible in the long term just to completely 100% of the time encounter gain, just to completely 100% of the time encounter praise, just to encounter fame. These things always kind of spin around each other. So what it means is these things are a shorthand for the world. They're a shorthand for the all. They're a shorthand for samsara. And one's reasons for being invested in samsara is because one wants the gain. One doesn't want the loss. One wants the praise. One doesn't want the blame. One wants the fame. One doesn't want the anonymity. One wants pleasure, and one doesn't want pain. The thing about this is that these things are always tied together. They're not possible to escape. So I was actually participating in a kind of a video conference or video Zoom just recently. And one of the questions that came at the end was, more or less, just kind of paraphrasing, was that, how do you basically enjoy your time, like have all this love for your relatives or love for your children and these people who are very close to you, and then not suffer when they are lost? And the answer was, well, basically, it's because we love them that we suffer when they're lost. There's no loving something, there's no attaching to something without suffering when it changes. That's what happens when we attach to things. And it's kind of going out into the world, attaching to it. The Buddha calls it upadana, something that one can kind of observe. One's mind actually launches out to these things and almost mixes in with them. The times when this happens is when one is really, really joyful about something. One gets a new house, one gets a new promotion, one has a new baby, all these various things that one loves in one's life. When that happens, one loves it. That loving, that being lost in it, that indulging, that's upadana. That's becoming. And you can see the mind becomes that. When it becomes it clings to it, it becomes it. It's sustained by it. One's identity is based on that. And then when those things change, when they become other than one expects, there's this cutting off of that. There's this pain. If one practices kind of meditation, then sometimes one may see the mind actually withdraw from these things and just look at it. What have I been doing? And kind of after a while, one forgets, it goes right back into these things. This is upadana. It's conditioned by this avijja, by not knowing, by not seeing these things as they really are. So long as one delights in the world in any way that one delights in the world, one will suffer when it changes. And this is the radical aspect of the Buddha's teachings on the 8 worldly winds. In order to let go of these things, one has to sometimes balance the way that one engages with them. One lets go of the more coarse aspects of the 8 worldly winds to develop the more refined ones, one might say, one way of looking at it. One develops these things for the sake of letting them go, for the sake of going beyond them. So long as one is immersed in liking, in attachment, in loving, it's inevitable that suffering will follow. It's something that one can't avoid. So the Buddha's teachings on these things are meant to point to something very, very important, which is that there's a path that leads completely beyond these things. And that path comes through dispassion. It doesn't come through attaching to gain, because loss is going to come. It doesn't come through attaching to one's pleasure, because pain is going to come. It doesn't come through attaching to fame, because anonymity is going to come. And it doesn't come through attaching to blame or praise, because blame is going to come. All these things kind of circle around each other. They're actually both the same. Gain and loss are the same. It's like the head and the tail of the snake. So to go beyond them, one has to cultivate this passion for them. One has to contemplate these things to teach the mind what they're really like. This is the overcoming of avijja. When avijja is overcome to small amounts, the mind can withdraw a bit. So, wait, what have I been doing here? What is it that I'm grabbing here? Why am I grabbing this? And when one overcomes it in large ways, then one can cut one's attachment to these things. That's why the Buddha describes, Ajahn Chah uses a simile of the mind being severed from these things like oil and water. The Buddha uses a more graphic simile like a cow whose tendons have been cut, the skin, all the various connective tissues in the skin have been cut. And when one puts the skin back on the cow, it's no longer connected like before. Although it looks like it, it's not connected. So one wants to sever one's connection to the world in these ways, and in this way one overcomes these 8 worldly winds. It's only through dispassion that one can do this. So although one has to balance to do it, the end goal, the end result that one is aiming for is this cutting, and it's through dispassion that one can gain this. This is a truly radical aspect of the Buddha's teachings on the 8 worldly winds and the purpose for which he taught it. Okay, so I think leave that for reflection. And wishing everybody all the blessings of Dhamma practice.